Very warm welcome to everybody this Sunday evening. It is the 22nd of November and welcome to the latest District 91 webinar. Very good evening to all of our distinguished guests from around Europe, and we'll be introducing a couple of those very shortly. In terms of the housekeeping, just a couple of points to go through this evening. Firstly, this is being recorded and will be made available on our district YouTube channel. Now, I'm hoping to be able to get it up there either very late tonight or very early tomorrow morning. So there should be a really quick turnaround on this. People will be able to review this and watch this at their leisure. Can you please, if possible, keep your cameras on? It's always great when we have faces that we can look at, especially for Jean and Morag. If you are having a really, really bad hair day, then we understand. But if possible, if you can try and keep your cameras on, that would be good. We are going to close the chat very shortly. We'll reopen it again at the end if we've got time for some additional questions. And Helena will speak to that in a minute. If you can also please make sure you keep your mics on mute. I know that sometimes people forget and phones go off and dogs bark in the background and things smash on the kitchen floor. So if you can just try and keep your microphones off until the end, that would be really, really appreciated. With those housekeeping rules in mind, the biggest housekeeping rule we have is please sit back and enjoy this. It's going to be fantastic. So without further ado, let me pass you over to the District 91 Programme Quality Director, and that is Helen Bowden-Brewer. Helena.
Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome to everybody who has joined us this evening. And I would also like to thank everybody who submitted our questions that are going to be put to Morag this evening. And when Andy just referenced questions, we have got quite a few to fit in this evening, and Jean is going to weave them into today's presentation, and so put Morag on her spot with some questions directly from you. And then towards the end, if obviously we have a few more questions, and we'll open the chat and we'll pop some questions on some of the things you may just want some follow-up thoughts on from you. So we'll be looking at those. So we'll open the chat up a little bit later. But first of all, obviously, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today, and it's also my pleasure to welcome Morag and Jean. Morag is our Toastmasters International Second Vice President, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Morag on several occasions from conferences and conventions, chatting as an international officer when she's been interviewed. We interviewed her as well. So it's been fantastic to get to know Morag, and obviously something's got right because I'm on Morag's team colours now. Who knew that was going to be a thing? And then I've also got somebody here today who I have known all the way through my Toastmasters journey. To many, she's just a past district director, you know, just one of them. But actually, to me, Jean Gamester was the president of the first club I ever joined. So I've known Jean the whole of my Toastmasters journey. So I'm very fortunate and very privileged. And I'm delighted to introduce Jean this evening, who's going to take us forward on this fantastic journey with Morag today. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you, Helena. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure to be your interview master tonight. And thank you for all of the fabulous questions that you've sent through. I've weaved them together into a combination. Some questions were a little bit similar to other questions to try and get us a nice batch focusing in on Morag growing as a leader. Now, I first met Morag about 7 years ago in my very first international convention as a member of the trio. So I arrived all bright-eyed going, oh, what's all this Toastmasters world I didn't realize existed in the international world in Cincinnati it was. And as I was entering the trio, Morag was leaving her trio, having celebrated leading her district to #1 in the world. So I'd heard of Morag, and then one day I met her, and since then, we've chatted and worked together on and off over the years, and I have learned lots from Morag. So I have grown as a leader from spending time with Morag, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what she has to say about the questions that we have for her tonight. So Morag, let's warm ourselves up by slightly going back in time, but first, recently you have been elected as our second vice president. So you're part of the executive committee that leads Toastmasters International across the globe, which is a fantastic achievement. I wonder what your younger self might think about this. I'm thinking of the 7-year-old Morag. If you were able to go back in time and tell 7-year-old Morag about all of this, about your growth as a leader, what would you say to her? And what might she say back to you? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you. Probably what I would say to her is, come out from behind that sofa now, which is probably what my mother said to me more than I would care to think about. As a child, I was very shy. And the minute the doorbell rang, I ran for one of two places, the back of the dog's kennel or behind the sofa. So that's probably what I would say to her, because this is not, if I think of being that age, I could never have imagined this. I wanted to be good at whatever I did. So I would work hard and learn to do whatever it was. But I didn't like attention. So this is actually a place that for the 7-year-old Morag would be extremely unlikely and definitely uncomfortable. And what I would say to her is, there's a whole world of opportunity. You don't have to go from A to Z immediately. You just take one step at a time. Progress is progress, however slow it is. And life is a team sport. You do not have to do it by yourself. And those are lessons that really apply to my life and my growth as a leader. When I look back over the years, it's something that, you know, I've really had to embrace. I believe fully in the philosophy of the growth mindset, that it's always possible to improve. And improvement often comes by very small steps, one after the other. I think that's probably what I'd tell her.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's talk about a particular small step, or maybe a big step. How did you get into Toastmasters?
My first encounter with Toastmasters was really interesting. I was an MBA student studying at the Open University, and we had summer school in Rugby in Warwickshire, which I think actually might be in your district or somewhere near the boundary of the two districts in the UK. And we had a presentation. Toastmasters came. I don't know if anyone is on this call tonight who was ever there, but they came to present Toastmasters to us because MBA students present all the time. And so we're a good target audience. If you've never thought of going to any business schools, that's a place to look for people who would benefit from what we have. And they came and they presented, and I thought, this is a really good idea. I like this idea. And I took the flyer they gave us. I've actually still got that flyer. It's somewhere packed in a box, but I do still have it. And I went home and thought, I'm going to have a look and see if I can find a club. And there were no clubs near where I lived. So I thought, well, nice idea. Let's just leave it at that. Wind the clock forward a number of years, and I moved to Germany. And just after moving to Germany, a colleague of my husband said, we have this new club in town. It's full of nice people who speak English. And if you come on Wednesday, you'll hear me give a speech. And I went on Wednesday and I heard him give a speech. And so I always know the date the date I went to my first Toastmasters meeting. It was March 15th, because his speech was entitled The Ides of March. That's how I'll always remember it. And I just loved the meeting. I loved the energy. I loved the orderliness of the meeting, the professionalism. I loved that people seemed to have a lot of fun as well as learning stuff. And that totally appealed to me. And I wanted to join immediately. The president, in fact, at the end of that meeting said, would you consider joining the club? And I said, oh, I'd love to. And she walked away and left me and said, that's great. And the next meeting I went to, at the end of the meeting, she said, would you consider joining the club? And I said, I'd love to. And she said, that's great. And she walked away and left me. And I'm beginning to think, have I got the wrong deodorant, or what's going on here? Didn't understand. The following meeting, we progressed a little, because then she said to me, I will get you someone who can help you. And the someone who could help me turned out, later I found out, to be the VP membership of the club, who said, I'm sure I've got a form somewhere. I will cut all of the weeks in between. I finally joined the club on August 1st that year. It was desperate. I got to the point where I said, if it doesn't happen at this next meeting, I'm done. I'm not coming back. But it did happen, and I'm very, very glad it did. For me, this was a huge learning right at the beginning of my Toastmasters time, because you can bet your boots I was sure that whenever I was going to be an officer in my club, that wouldn't happen to anyone else. It was always really important to me to make sure that the whole of my team knew where the forms were, knew how to fill them out, and could actually convert that guest to a member as painlessly as possible. The club was a brand new club, and the officers of that club were just trying to get familiar with what to do. So they were doing the best they could. They were nice people. Ken Field was right when he invited me. They were nice people. They just hadn't quite worked out what to do, and it took a little bit of time for that all to happen. So that was my very first, those were my first encounters with Toastmasters, my first meetings with Toastmasters. I had the opportunity to become an officer the following year. In that first year, many people asked me to go to district events, to area events, division events, and I just wasn't interested. It makes me smile when I think about it now, when I think of how many invitations I turned down. I was like, no. I was just quite happy with the club meeting and giving speeches and taking meeting roles and being mentored and all of that. That was enough for me at that point. I just had no interest in the rest. And so the following year, when I became an officer in the club, I became the VP Education, and that's another story. We'll leave that one for another day, I think. But becoming the VP Education of the club gave me the opportunity to do something that I knew, and that was, I love seeing people develop. And so as VP Education, I could think, this is all about administration and meeting organisation, or I could think, this is all about making opportunities where people can develop. And that's how I saw it, and that's something that is really dear to my heart. It just fills me with great joy when we see people progress and when we see people become what they never imagined they could be. And that was my introduction into leadership in Toastmasters.
Fantastic. So you've told us about joining Toastmasters, and yeah, my first club, I don't think they believed me when I said I wanted to join on the first night, but I really did. So I can totally empathize with that story. So bringing it closer to now, how do you go about growing as a leader? What do you do? What do you pay attention to as you try and develop yourself?
That's a great question. So there's a number of things that I do. I think it's really important to keep an eye on the outside world. What's happening in the world around you? And I look at different things. So I look at things that are there skills I want to develop? For example, I'll give you an example, a very recent example. The executive committee of the board has been preparing the budget for next year. And I knew before we came to do the budget, I know quite a bit about finance, but I feel the responsibility is much greater. Therefore, I really need to sharpen my budget skills. And for me, some of that was a little bit of reading over some stuff I knew, but it was also going to my mentor. And my mentor is the immediate past president, Deepak Menon. For those of you who don't know, Deepak is an accountant. And so I went to him and said, before we do this budget, I'd like to see the organization's finances through your eyes, having been the president and knowing the whole world of accountancy. I'd like to see it through your eyes. We spent 5 hours just looking at the budget before we actually came to budget preparation, just going over it. It was the most fascinating ride of my life. Just thinking new thoughts, asking new questions, discovering questions he hadn't thought about, but that occurred to me in the course of the discussion, and just really expanding how I see things to the point where I can't wait to do the budget next year. This is so good. I really enjoyed this experience, and feeling like my skills are in a good place, and that when we actually did prepare the budget draft, that I was able to contribute with my peers to that process, and to do it in a way that I believe is honouring of the organisation, because that's important. So there's the refining and development of skills that you think are necessary for what's coming up is important to me. But there's also that journey of personal growth in all of this. I remember when I was the PQD in my district, something happened. I can't even remember what, but it just made me think, oh, those people are crazy. And I realized that's not really a helpful thought in this position. And so I reached out to one of the past district directors and I asked him, could we have some time together? And instead of telling him the details, I painted broadly the situation. And I said to him, how would you interpret this situation? And he gave me a completely different view from the one I held, without him knowing personalities or any of the situation. And that was a moment for me that really challenged me, but opened my mind to try and see situations through the eyes of people who hold different values to you, who see the world in a completely different way from you. Because that makes you, I think, more receptive as a person. That makes you more open to the possibility that your worldview is not the only worldview, and actually you might be wrong. That was really important for me to recognize that. And so all through my development as a leader, I've had people who do around me who see the world in different ways, and people that I will ask things of and ask perspective of without sharing all the details of things I'm looking at. So those things help you, and they help me in how I think. But also for me, really importantly, is I'm a great reader. There's a saying that leaders are readers. And today, I don't think you have to be a reader per se, but I do think you have to have input. So whether that's in the form of podcasts, of video messages, of whatever it is, or if you, like me, actually like to pick up a book and feel the pages as you turn them. I know it's old school, but I do love it. And there are podcasts I listen to as well. But you need input from somewhere that bring new ideas, that help you also to crystallize your own thoughts and to understand what you're about. And I'm a reflective learner in life. And I think that's one of the things that if you're good at reflecting, you can really grow. So when you take those situations where things did not work out, and you can actually either by yourself or with someone else, honestly look at what happened and understand what was my part in that not working out. Or when things worked really well, what was my part? Or what could I have done differently here? What behavior am I willing to try? I think being willing to make yourself vulnerable also helps. But that comes with time. Not everyone is willing to do that immediately. You need to find that safe space. I think so much of growth is about having a safe space to grow. So those are some of the ways that I approach it.
Very good. So, but there's about 14 strands now that I want to go down. And I'm going to pick one, which is at the beginning of that, you mentioned learning from Deepak as your mentor. And I know you have loads of mentoring relationships, both as a mentor and as a protege. So, what do you gain from mentoring relationships? And, would you recommend them for us?
I mentor professionally. So for me, mentoring is very much at the core of what I do. And I always feel that I gain as much from mentoring as I do from being mentored. And we sometimes think when we mentor other people, it's always about giving, but it is about receiving. And some of the things I receive are the satisfaction of seeing the protege grow, of seeing them not need you anymore. It's a beautiful thing when a protege says to you, instead of having a call with you once a week, could we go to twice a week? Or can I just call you if ever I need you? That's a beautiful thing when someone has been given enough from you. They've done the work, but you've been part of that process, and suddenly they are able to do things with confidence without you. So there's that satisfaction there. But there's also, when you mentor, I find the questions that come up. So a bit like our conversation, the protege will say something and I think, I really want to explore that. And they'll maybe say something about themselves that is something I haven't thought about me. So then immediately I'm thinking, I wonder how I would deal with that. I wonder how I would do that. And those things make me understand myself better. And they make me explore more of my world of leadership and of life generally in those conversations. In the being mentored for me is fascinating. I haven't always agreed with every mentor I've had. And I think that's healthy, because a mentor is your guide. They're kind of like someone who's read the next page in the book or the next chapter in the book in some ways. And so they can give you a lot of guidance, inspiration, support, encouragement, all of those things. But as a person, I think you have a responsibility for what you take on board. So you have the right to choose through the filters of values that you have. Is this something that I am ready to receive or I want to receive? Is this something I'm going to do anything with? Or am I just going to say, thank you very much, and I'll just leave it to one side? I'm always grateful that mentors give me input, but I don't necessarily take all of it. I think you have to be selective when you do that. I've had mentoring relationships that didn't work out. I was assigned a mentor in one program that I was in. We spoke once and I thought, this person just doesn't get me. I have to decide, do we invest more in this relationship, or do we just say, let's look for a different mentor? And that's what I chose to do, because I really couldn't, it just couldn't work for me. And I think the mentor was also quite relieved, because I think for them, they were thinking, oh, this isn't going to work for us. I don't know how to end it. And so I helped out by ending that relationship.
So I think what's really interesting about that is that there's something about taking ownership within that relationship, whatever your role is. So it's not a kind of arrive and, now I have to do it in a particular way. It's about creating that together. Yeah. So I'm going to segue on to another question related to, I guess, taking things on. So because we're a volunteer organization, it takes something to make people want to step into roles, to take on responsibilities within the organization. So how do you inspire people to step up into leadership roles?
Often you don't know you've inspired someone to step up until they tell you much later. And so I personally don't necessarily go around looking for how will I inspire or who will I inspire. What I do is I look for people with great attitude, and I look to create opportunities for them. And those opportunities might be to have someone placed on a committee that you're setting up, or it might be to get them involved as your assistant, to bring them into your world. So I can remember going to an event in Prague a number of years ago, Toastmasters event, and I thought, I'm driving to Prague. I have 3 empty seats in the car. Who will I take with me? And I took 3 people, 3 women with me. And it was a great journey, and we laughed a lot, of course, as you can imagine. And the journey from here to Prague is about just under 3 hours. So we did the event, the Toastmasters event, and we drove back that same day. Wow, what an amazing time They loved the event and all that happened. So on the way there, you're able to have all those conversations, instigated largely by them rather than me trying to dominate that conversation. I just created the space. They had the place where they had me and they could ask me questions. How does this work? I was wondering about, why did you choose that particular project, Morag? How did you do this? What was it like when? Just all those kind of questions that give them a greater exposure to your world. And then on the way home after the event, of course, you have, as we all do when we make those kind of journeys, you have the big debrief on the way home as you stop for takeaway food on the way back, which extends the journey even further. And eventually you get home that night. But suddenly they've had a whole day of unofficial mentoring of sorts, of exposure to worlds they didn't know were there. You have the chance to sow seed on those journeys, and you have the chance to ask questions around, could you imagine? I love that question. I love asking people, could you imagine? Because even if they say, oh no, I couldn't, you know that what happens is afterwards, they will then think about it. And they start to imagine. They make a decision if they will or they won't do it in the end, but they will actually entertain that thought later. It comes back to us. And then you have to be open and ready to have that conversation once they've had time to think about it and come back to you. And I think there's so much about just giving people access to you, giving people access to opportunities, helping them to reflect on what they've done. Or when you're in their space and you see them active and you see them demonstrating a great attitude, is to go and acknowledge it. That's so important, to actually come and say to somebody, I saw what you just did. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you for stepping up and doing this today. Because I think as a leader, one of the things that we often don't talk about is, and it's something that matters a lot to me, is I like to be a leader who sees. I like to see what's coming in the world, but I also like to see what people are doing. And by see, I don't just mean notice like the police observing or whatever, but I mean actually notice what somebody does and be able to say to them, I see what you did. That was so cool. I see what you did. That was so kind. Whatever it was they did. And to build those relationships with people that encourage them, that position them, and also to have conversations with people. I have lots of people who call me up and say, I've been given this opportunity. What do you think? So being willing to help, I can't tell them whether to take it or not, but I can help them ask the right questions. And I think those things all put together in different ways, people might sometimes see that as having been inspired. I think the other part of inspiration is, what is about walking the talk. Are you actually doing what you'd want other people to do, so that you're occupying a space that they might at some point desire for themselves? Because if you're a leader who is hidden away, and I don't mean by this that you should be totally, razzle dazzle in the public eye all the time, but if you're a leader who just stays away from it all and doesn't connect with people, if you're a leader who is not visible in actually walking the talk and being real in life, then I think people don't connect with you. It's very hard to be inspired by people when you don't see anything of who they are and you don't see them as real and genuine people. And so for me, that's something I always try to be who I really am. Hopefully I succeed most of the time. I'd like to think so.
Very good. So there's lots of planting of seeds and sowing of seeds. And actually, I see that a lot in Toastmasters. I think it's part of how we're able to encourage people. Of course, not everything goes beautifully every time. Sometimes there are difficult situations, negative situations with people. How do you handle those kind of situations as a leader?
I believe that everyone has value. And that for me is a real important principle. Everyone has value. No one is more valuable than anyone else. My father, who's long since passed away, had this expression that was kind of drilled into us from we were very small. I won't say it in the Scottish vernacular as he would have said it, but the translation of that is, we are all children of the same father. And that is so important. So we all are in different places. Sometimes we are negative because of the circumstances we are in. Sometimes we are angry because of what's just happened to us, or life is unfair, or we are sick, or so many things can influence our behavior and our approach. And I think if you value people and you say you are of the same value as me, then you start from a different point. You are more willing to listen. You're more willing to try to understand the situation. And I think with negative people, when you see or difficult situations, you know, the other part of that is gratitude. And that might seem really strange. But the first thing to look for then, once you have that mindset of you are just as valuable as me, okay, let me look for something that I'm thankful for in this situation. Because that's a hook that you're going to hang your hat on to carry you through that process. So I can be thankful for that bit. That's great. Is there anything else? And sometimes that's a struggle to find, what am I thankful for? And find those things and be truly thankful in your heart for them. Then to look at all the challenging bits. Let's talk about it. I think a conversation is so important. Help me understand why this is so difficult for you. Help me understand why you don't like the way things are. And then let's try to find the common ground as we listen to others. And let's try and build our way forward from the common ground. Sometimes we can't agree on things immediately and it takes time. Some things take time. I had a colleague in Toastmasters who we had a difference of opinion about something, and this person just would not speak to me for a couple of years, until one day we reached out to each other and this person then was able to say, I'm ready to talk about this now. And we were able to be reconciled, and we're great friends now, moving forward as, you know, good colleagues together now, having sorted everything out. It's not always possible to have a quick fix and be all happy and sunshiny and together immediately. Sometimes it takes time. You have to invest in it. You have to respect that we're all in a different place and we're all on a different track together. And sometimes I have to wait for you. Sometimes you have to wait for me. But we need to have that mutual respect and that understanding, that being willing to ask questions and being willing to really listen to the answer, then build on whatever common ground you find with a common purpose and work towards that common purpose together.
Thank you. I think what's really interesting about this is you've kind of referred to long-term relationships in Toastmasters, so that, you know, even though we change roles a lot, we often have these relationships that go on for a long time. So there's that kind of opportunity to, you know, find things difficult and to heal and to, you know, maybe even be stronger because of it. So on the subject of challenges, this year has been a rather challenging year, has it not, with COVID? And I'm really curious about what your tips are for clubs as they seek to lead in such challenging times.
This is a really interesting season for clubs. I earlier this evening actually just did a webinar for District 95 on the very subject of quality club meetings in these times. And I think what we've seen is some clubs have had amazing numbers of guests come. My home club, we have seen quite a lot of past members come back, visit, and explore the possibility of rejoining the club. It's really fascinating. So what seems so difficult for those of us who love the face-to-face experience and just how it used to be back in January and February of this year, for us that might seem strange. But here we are in a situation where for other people, the online experience is actually desirable. That's where they want to be in the middle of all of that. And so I think that for clubs, I think there are certain principles for leading through difficult times that would apply to any club in all of this. And I think it is, you have to be honest that this is a difficult time. Be honest with your members. This is difficult, but we can do this together. And then we have to find our way through this. We have to take care of our members. Our district mission hasn't changed. Our club mission hasn't changed. Our club mission is all about the development of the individual. It's not about a meeting format or a program or any of those things. It is about the growth of the individual. And keeping that mission at the forefront of what you do, I think will keep you on a good path. So how will you help members to grow in this season? You know, we have to take care of that our meetings are interesting and varied. And we often hear that variety comes, one of the things that you hear so often, if you want to have variety in your program, have themed meetings. And my reaction to that when we first went online was, oh, please no. Please don't give me a themed meeting. It's going to make the meeting last twice as long. It's enough, it's enough. And then I visited a club in Pardubice in the Czech Republic, and their meeting theme, which I did not pick up when I registered for the meeting, was red. And as Helena said earlier, red is one of my favourite colours. It's a Morag colour. That night was the first time in a long time I was not wearing red. And I showed up at their meeting and everyone else in the meeting was in red and I was not in red. But that was their meeting theme and they had table topics built around it. And it just brought a little variety and it showed me you can actually have a meeting theme that doesn't extend the time of your meeting. It's quite possible. And so I think it challenged me again to think, oh, we have to be creative. We have to remain creative. You know, look at the opportunity of where we are. One of the mistakes that my home club made, we made it right at the beginning of going online, was treating it as temporary. It was like, we'll be online for a few meetings. Well, here we are 8.5 months later and we're still online. And I think there's a temptation at the beginning of that to think, oh, this is just for a few weeks. This is just for short term. And then we'll go back to how it was. So we don't have to make the effort. I think you have to treat it as a regular experience and you have to use it as your regular experience. You know, it's a bit like when you move house, if you're going somewhere into temporary accommodation, then you probably don't unpack everything. You know, you just kind of unpack the clothes you really need and a few bits and pieces. You're not going to get the ornaments and the pictures out if you're just there very short term. Whereas once you move into your home, you unpack everything. And I think we need to treat our online meetings a little bit like that we've actually moved in. So we should unpack the boxes and we should bring that full experience. You know, and I would say this is a time to experiment and be creative in your meetings. What could you do that would be different? But be mindful of your members. Remember, it gets exhausting being on Zoom long term. And you have to weigh up that balance of, do we want a shorter meeting? Is that more beneficial to us? Or my home club has gone for putting a break in the meeting, so that everyone can go and get a drink and come back. And some people sit and chat during that time, and it just changes the dynamic of the meeting. So I think for clubs, it's really important to do that, to understand how do we serve our members in this time, to bring the full experience for members, including keep recruiting guests and keep converting your guests to members, because there is demand. We just perhaps have to look in different ways and approach it in different ways. but believe in your club. Look at the power of the programme and believe in what your club can deliver for your members, present and future, because you know it's done it in the past. So those would be some of the things I would say to our clubs at the moment.
Fabulous. Thank you, Morag. I'm feeling lots of adaptability while remembering what's important. So I'm coming up to the last question I'm going to give you from my magic list. So if there's a question that is buzzing in your head, then send that through on the chat, and Helena will pick out one or two for our final couple of questions before we finish tonight. But my last question is, I guess, remembering what's important and adapting. You must have a lot on your to-do list, Morag. So I'm really curious about how you balance, you know, TI role and work and family. How do you manage that balance?
There are a lot of things on my to-do list right now. You're absolutely right. And I'm very fortunate in having great support at home. For those of you who know him, my husband, or who don't know him, my husband David is also a Toastmaster. We joined on that same day in August, all those years ago. And that helps enormously if you have support at home, because it's Sunday evening and I'm on a Zoom call. I'll tell you what he's doing right now, shall I? He's actually mopping the bathroom floor. And that's great. That's great support and great help at home, just to do those kind of things. But you need to own your time. We all have the same amount of time. And you need to decide what matters to you. What are your priorities? You know, if you're taking on a role in Toastmasters, I would always ask someone who's doing the role, how long do you spend? And then you have to work out, do I need to spend that amount of time too? Because some people do much more than is needed for a role. And so then you can work out what is essential and what would be that extra value add if I had the time that I could give to it. And am I prepared to give that? I was given a tip by someone a number of years ago, and that was to take your week and divide it into 21 blocks, 3 per day, and to put into those blocks things like your work, your social time, in my case, Toastmasters. And his advice was that 3 of those blocks every week should be personal time. So either time you spend on something that's indulgent for yourself, or exercise, or time with friends, so that you do have downtime in your week. Everyone can sustain it for a while when it goes more than that, but not every week when it's more than that. So trying to make sure you do have some time in there for yourself, and being able to say no, to understand your own boundaries in whatever field it is. I mean, for me, I think we have to prioritize our time. You know, what matters? I work for myself, so I decide how much work I'm going to take. That's based on how much money do I want to earn? How much do I need to earn? And so we all have those decisions at our fingertips to make, and working out the priorities of things and whether we can do them or whether we can't. You know, there is no point in becoming sick because you've overloaded yourself with things. It's better to build up slowly to something if you have to do it. Or if you do get in over your neck, there's always the power of delegation. Who can you bring alongside you, or who else on your team could do the things that you don't need to do? Who would benefit from doing this? Sometimes at the beginning of something, you have to invest a bit more in someone to make them able to do the task that you're giving them, but then you're free from that. And I think it's also good from time to time, in Toastmasters in particular, and this was advice I was given quite recently, was to sit down and count up how many hours or how many minutes did I spend on Toastmasters activities. And that might be preparing for a speech, it might be attending a meeting, it might be a call with a mentor, whatever it is, and add that up in a week and look at your pattern for a few weeks, for 2 or 3 weeks. How many hours or minutes have I spent each week on Toastmasters? And then you have a question that only you can answer. Is this enough? Is this too much? or is this just about right for me to bring balance into my life? One of the things that really mattered to me when I began my journey to second vice president last year was to take a look at my life and say, I want to be fit and well and healthy. And I can only do that if I take care of myself. So however much I'm going to invest in Toastmasters, I need to invest in me first, because only when I am strong and healthy, mentally, physically, emotionally, can I give of my best. So killing yourself for something is not really worth it in my book. In my book, you have to work out what are your values and how will you be able to contribute to the best of your ability in whatever field it is, family, work, Toastmasters, something else in life that you have going on.
Fabulous. Okay, so we've got balance and time management and delegation. So let's see, Helena, what have you got in store for us? You got a question for us?
I've got a sort of question. It's come to me about contests, and just generally, obviously, I was talking about contests. So we're just coming to the end of our division. Our next division contest is on Saturday. It's our last one in District 91. And there's been this debate about cameras on, cameras off. And it's sort of which way would you prefer contests to be run? And people have been more drawn to wanting to put cameras on for the humorous because they want to see the reaction. And then other people are saying, well, actually, it's safer for the contestants because then obviously they're not distracted by somebody else maybe taking over the screen who hasn't put themselves on silent or you know, starts talking or whatever. Do you have any cameras on, cameras off thoughts on that one? Because at the moment we're cameras off on contests.
Okay. I see this debate also, Helena, in clubs. There are clubs who have this debate. I've had launched a brand new club on Friday, and we've made it our practice that we will always have our club meetings with cameras on because we want to see each other. And all we do is ask our people to switch the cameras off if they need to leave the screen for some reason, so that there's not the movement distraction of somebody disappearing off. I do think it's a very individual thing of what you prefer. When I gave my reflect on your path speech for my first path, I specifically asked my members, the members of my club, to switch their cameras off because I had written my speech as a bedtime story and I wanted to tell it with that atmosphere. Contests are a little different because people perhaps feel there's more at stake if they're contestants. It's hard to know. Everyone is really different in this, in what you like. I personally think it's really nice to see the audience and see the audience reactions. And if I'm a judge in a contest, it's nice to see what is the reaction of the audience to this speaker, rather than everyone's cameras off. It's also quite nice if you're an audience member to feel like you're part of it. If your camera is off, I think you're more easily distracted. If my camera is off, there is nothing to stop me checking the messages on my phone or going off and doing something else. And you have no idea if you still have an audience there. So my personal preference is actually for contests, camera on, but I do understand the concerns about distraction. But then you need some good practices. I mean, we have, even when we are in person, we have the possibility of distractions, but hopefully the contest chair sets out the protocol at the beginning, and the same online. This is what we'd like you to do.
We were very fortunate. Our district chief judge gave a webinar about, you know, practices and how to run contests, and back in August, and is doing so again in January, because it is a different situation at the moment that people are finding themselves in this online environment, and obviously all the different Facebook groups again are sort of chatting about cameras on, cameras off, so maybe avoid some of them for a while, Morag, as well. There's just lots of chat on that one at the moment. Having a quick look at one of the other things, we've got a question here about what's the most challenging leadership situation you have faced?
Oh, that's really interesting. In Toastmasters or outside Toastmasters? That's my question.
Now I think in Toastmasters is something that obviously here, but you could go either way on this. You could go either way, Morag.
In Toastmasters, one of the most challenging leadership situations that I had to face was having a member of my team who was not performing, but was very new in the role. And that's really challenging, because when someone's new in a role, they need to learn how to do it. But there comes a point when you have to decide as a leader, is this person capable or not? Can they become capable or not? And are they willing to actually do the job that we need them to do? And as a leader, you have to make the call on that, knowing that people may agree or disagree with you, and that you are going to have to live with the consequences of that decision, not just for the rest of that program year, but perhaps even for much longer, that you might be remembered as the person who had someone removed from office. And it's difficult when you consider all of the situations. You know, for me, I believe firmly that when you're new in a role, excuse me, that you have the right to make mistakes. I believe everyone has the right to make mistakes, because mistakes are one way of learning. And for me, I like to think that I don't mind if people make mistakes, so long as they're going to learn from them. If it's just carelessness, if it's this doesn't matter, so what, then that reflects an attitude. Because sometimes I think when you look at those kind of behaviors, they're reflecting what you believe. They're reflecting your values. And if you think of the organization's core values, you know, respect. So, nah, I'm not going to bother doing my job. Don't really care. And this person actually said to me, why don't you get someone else to do the job that you'll be satisfied with? And I'll stay in the role. So essentially, I'll get the credit for having this role, but someone else will do the job you want done. Which, of course, completely confounds any sense of integrity that I have. How on earth could this be? And then you have to work through all of that. And for me, this was really difficult about what is permissible in the sense of new in the role, making mistakes. How long does that go on for? And then how do you deal with this, the attitude part of it, that is not embracing the core values and is actually flying in the face? And that's tough when you think in Toastmasters, so often we are about kindness. I think often we're about generosity and gratitude and positive affirming experiences for people, to actually be the one who says, enough. I'm going to be the leader who says, this is not acceptable. We've tried a form of rehabilitation that hasn't worked. And now I have to be the leader who takes that tough stand and says, my people deserve better than the service that this leader is giving. And we'll make that happen. So that was probably one of the toughest decisions I had to make. But those are defining moments in leadership, aren't they? When you discover, what will I stand for? Am I prepared to be the leader who says enough? And I discovered in that moment that I am the leader who is prepared to say enough. The values matter. How we serve our people matters. And if you can't do that, then we have to find someone who can. Great question.
Well done, Morag. Thank you very much. I'm very impressed, referring back to your point about resilience, that you've managed to keep talking pretty much for an hour. You haven't even taken a sip of water. So very well done. I feel like we've had a great opportunity to hear from you, your insights, your experience of leadership, the challenges and the times when you've got to make the tough choices, and the joys of leadership. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of us. Lots of their questions, our questions, were covered here today. And I just want to say a great big thank you.
my pleasure, absolute pleasure to be with you today and have the opportunity to explore lots of different kinds of questions. So thank you for that. I wasn't sure what was going to come. So it's a lovely experience of being with you and having the chance to explore these topics today.
Thank you, Morag, and very welcome to District 91, UK South, and of course from people all over the world with us today. So thank you, and thank you for everyone who's participated and listened in today. I'm now going to hand you back to our fabulous PQD, Helena Bonbrewer.
Thank you very much, Jean, and thank you very much, Morag. I don't know about everybody else here. I could see heads down a lot. I know a number of other people have got pages of notes as a result of this. And you said you don't know when you've inspired somebody. Wow, I think you've probably inspired everybody that is on this call today and during this meeting. How you've delivered the answers to those questions, it was a proper full table topics impromptu approach that you've gone for this evening. And thank you for all of our members that submitted the actual questions. It's just fantastic. So thank you very much. And thank you, Jean, for being the interviewer this evening. That in itself is always something which is fun to do, but at the same time, sometimes hard when you know the person on the other side. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank you everybody for being here this evening, much appreciated. And I'm going to just hand you back now to our wonderful Andy Hesse, who's just going to wrap this up and just confirm what's happening to us next. So thank you, everybody.
Helena, thank you very much indeed. And Morag, again, thank you very much on behalf of the webinar team. It was absolutely inspiring and an absolute pleasure to have you. So thank you very much for that. And also, Jean, thank you very much. We've got 3 more webinars before Christmas, 3 more sleeps before Christmas. We've got a fantastic webinar next week on club coaching. It's going to be presented by Jackie Rosser, and it's entitled, Would You Let Someone Drown? Also known as Becoming a Club Coach. So for those of you who haven't got your grade 1 swimming certificate, this could well be the webinar for you. 6th of December, Florian Bay, our immediate past district director, will be joining us to talk about district leadership roles. So this is area director, division director, as well as the trio and also the associated admin roles as well. That is going to be really useful if you want to think about next year, if you want to think about becoming a division director, or you think about becoming an area director. And Florian will also be talking about the process of going through that. So that's going to be really good as well. Our final webinar is on the 13th of December, and that is with Sam Warner and myself. And it's going to be the Area Directors Halftime Team Talk. So we've come to the halfway point of the year. It's a chance for the area directors to go through any concerns they've got, any questions they've got. We can talk about things like area director reports. We can talk about COTS and DOTS and what their succession planning is as well. So it's a free-for-all evening where people can just drop in, have a chat. The area directors control the agenda, and it's a brilliant way just to help people with any questions or concerns. And it's just a little bit of learning that is passed on to people. We are also looking for people to run webinars in early 2021. So we've got a few already for January and the beginning of Feb. If you want to take part, then please contact me and we will see what we can do. Other than that, all that remains for me to do is to thank everybody for turning up tonight. It's been an absolute privilege. The recording will be sent out in a link. So if you missed some of it, don't worry. We'll send you the YouTube link, and hopefully that'll be ready by tomorrow morning or lunchtime tomorrow. And I will get that across as soon as possible. From me, on behalf of Morag, Jean, Helena, and everybody behind the scenes, thank you very much indeed. Have a wonderful Sunday night and a wonderful week, and I will see you back here next week. Thank you very much.